Welcome back to our deep dive in understanding what the coronavirus is, how it works, why it's led to a pandemic, and most importantly, how we can learn to protect ourselves both now and in future pandemics. Last episode, we learned that all living things are made up of tiny Lego blocks called cells. A cell is a lot like a mini version of you. It's filled with tiny organs that help the cell carry out activities to survive, which, in turn, ensures that your body functions properly and you survive. But to get a proper understanding of what's happening in the pandemic, it's critical to not only realize that you depend on your cells to stay alive, but also understand a very important job your cells perform called protein synthesis. Proteins are like little workers that carry out various tasks in your body to keep you functioning. Your cells are constantly producing all kinds of proteins so you don't experience system failure. But how do your cells know how to make all this stuff? The answer is DNA. Several long but lively hours have passed, and your team has been working tirelessly to win the snowball fight. Yes, in the end, your team won using communication, teamwork, and organization. In fact, you were the last standing member. Hooray! Anyways, you and your friends are pretty exhausted, and by this point, your toes are starting to get terribly cold from all the moisture that has seeped into your snow boots. Honestly, what better way would there be to warm up than to bake a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies? Yes, you imagine yourself sitting by the fireplace with your friends, munching on chewy or crispy cookies, whichever way you prefer. So you rush into your house, but you realize that you don't know how to make chocolate chip cookies. You need a recipe that explains what ingredients you need and the steps you can take. Well, surprise, surprise, the human body also needs instructions in order to be able to carry out the activities essential for survival. Our cells are incapable of thinking for themselves, which makes sense. They don't have their own brains. Thus, they need a strict recipe that they can follow in order to know what to do. This recipe for life is called DNA. Found in the nucleus of every cell, DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, is the molecule that contains all of the information that cells need to function for survival. Remember DNA as two things. One, DNA is considered the source code for life because it contains instructions for making a huge variety of proteins, which are the main workers of the cell. The information in DNA determines what proteins our cells can make, and each protein performs a specific job. Keep this in mind because we'll be diving into the world of proteins in just a moment. 2. DNA is also considered to be the molecule of inheritance because it's the genetic information that our parents pass down to us. DNA determines all of our traits. You can thank DNA for being the person that you are today. As you can see in this model, DNA takes the shape of a double helix, which looks like a twisted ladder. It's composed of two long chains of nucleotides that act as building blocks. Each nucleotide is made up of three major components: 1 a sugar, 2 a phosphate, and 3 a nitrogenous base. The sugar and the phosphate work together to form the backbone of DNA, or the rails of this twisted ladder. But we care more about the nitrogenous bases because they are what make up the actual ingredients for the recipe of life. There are 4 nitrogenous bases in DNA called adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Each base pairs with another specific base on the other strand and connects them with a special chemical bond. Adenine pairs only with thymine and cytosine pairs with guanine. To remember this, you can think of how apples come from trees and cars are parked in garages. Anyways, back to DNA. Remember how we learned that all sorts of proteins with different responsibilities all come from DNA? Well, how is it that just 4 nitrogenous bases code for such a vast array of proteins? The information in DNA comes from the sequence of the nitrogenous bases. Think of when you type your password to log into your email. The individual characters of your password don't have any meaning on their own, but when arranged in the right order, they unlock your account. The nitrogenous bases work in a similar way, by producing a piece of meaningful information based on their specific order. Thus, by arranging in different combinations, The nitrogenous bases can code for many different types of proteins. So, how exactly does DNA act as the source code for life? How does it actually make anything happen in the cell or the body? Remember that DNA is considered the source code for life because it contains instructions for making proteins. Proteins are involved in many different activities that are all critical for survival, such as converting nutrients from food into energy and allowing your body to move. There are two main processes involved in making proteins from DNA: transcription and translation. Transcription is the process by which a copy of a gene, a section of DNA that contains the instructions for making a protein, is created. If we imagine that DNA is a recipe book, a gene is like an individual recipe for making a specific protein. But because a cell only has one original recipe book, it can't tear pages willy nilly out of its book to make proteins, or the DNA will be damaged. The cell must make a copy of the specific recipe or gene with the instructions for the protein it wants to make. During transcription, a special enzyme, which is a type of protein, locates where the gene starts and separates the two strands of DNA. It then makes a copy of the DNA using RNA nucleotides as building blocks. As RNA and DNA are both nucleic acids, they are relatively similar to one another, but RNA structure is a bit different than that of DNA because RNA is single stranded. This forms a strand of mRNA that contains a copy of the information in the gene, like a photocopy of the desired recipe. When transcription is completed, the mRNA transcript leaves the nucleus and travels to a ribosome in the cytoplasm. Translation is the process by which a protein is created from the information contained in the mRNA transcript. After transcription, the mRNA transcript binds to a ribosome, the protein making factory of the cell. The ribosome reads the mRNA and, with the help of transfer or tRNA, makes a protein. Imagine that the DNA recipe and all of its instructions are written in a foreign language. Before the cell can make a protein using a recipe in DNA, it must translate the recipe from the language of DNA and RNA, which is in nucleotides, to the language of proteins, which is in amino acids. Molecules of tRNA can read the recipe written in the language of DNA, determine which ingredients are needed, and fetch the corresponding amino acids one at a time to build the protein. This process is continued until the entire recipe has been read and translated and a long chain of amino acids has been created. When translation is completed, the amino acid chain detaches from the ribosome and folds into a very specific shape to become a full-fledged protein. This protein then goes to work in the cell. So, what's the takeaway from today's episode? 1. Every cell in our body contains a set of instructions called DNA that it consults in order to make proteins. 2. We need proteins because they are the main workers of our cells that carry out various tasks to keep our body functioning. 3. Our cells constantly make proteins through protein synthesis, a process that involves transcribing a copy of a gene and translating it from the language of DNA and RNA to the language of proteins. Stay tuned next time to find out how viruses hijack our cells and take over protein synthesis in order to produce an army of viral invaders.